morning. Bible reading today comes from Esther. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. And that's where we pick up here. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and to explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. There's a lot of toing and froing in this. "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Book of Esther is a great story. Have you ever been to a movie or watched a movie at home and had an absolutely amazing line that has stuck with you and that actually helps you through your life? This is one of mine from Braveheart.
I am William Wallace, and I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. You've come to fight as free men, and free men you are. What will you do with that freedom? Will you fight?
Right? Against that? No! We will run!
And we will live. Aye. Fight and you may die. Run and you'll live. At least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
That's a great line. Fight for our lives. They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. You're really lucky I didn't just play most of The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings for you and just leave it at that. So we have a similar line in this reading. No, it's not that one. 14. "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." If Hollywood ever wanted a political thriller set in the ancient world, they wouldn't need to look much further than the book of Esther. The year is 460 BC, and the setting is this amazing Persian Empire. It extends from right down from Egypt and Libya, right through modern-day Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, and right up to the borders of modern-day India. A massive superpower and very rich. There was in Xerxes I, who was the king, there was gold, silk, marble pillars. Just imagine a really opulent scene with marble, but lots of beautiful furnishings as well. And at the centre of it all, Xerxes I decided to hold a party. Not a party like we would put on, but a party that went for months on end. It wasn't a quiet diplomatic dinner, don't think sort of Queen Elizabeth II style party. It was a spectacle. There was wine, there was white and violet linen that represents royalty draped all over the place. There were couches that were inlaid with precious stones. So it was excess at the scale that only an emperor could manage. And the king is just flexing his muscles. He's showing his generals and his nobles and the rounding minor princes of his glory, and that no one else can rival it. And then, in a moment of drunken arrogance, he makes a mistake and he summons his queen, Queen Vashti. But Vashti is hosting her own royal banquet. She's powerful in her own circle, she's respected, and she doesn't feel like being paraded like a trophy. So when the king demands that she appears before his drunken court, she refuses. And that refusal creates a power vacuum. If an empire is built on absolute power, defiance cannot go unanswered. And so the king's advisors panic. If the queen can disobey, then anyone can disobey. And what happens to control? So they persuade Xerxes to make an example of her, and Vashti is banished and erased. But that state can't go on for long. There needs to be a replacement. So enter Esther, our next character in this movie. She's a young Jewish woman who was orphaned and part of an exiled group of Jews that were living in Persia under foreign rule. She's been raised by her cousin and her former guardian, Mordecai, who is a sharp-minded official, and he's reached a little bit of power level in the Xerxes government. And so Xerxes launches a kingdom-wide scheme for a new queen, and Mordecai puts Esther forward into that process of being considered. So she spends months preparing, being perfumed. I don't know what it is they do. Lots of training, lots of strategy. But what Mordecai and Esther aren't telling anyone is that they are both Jewish, that they are part of the tribe of Benjamin. So she enters the palace not just as a contestant for the queen, but also as a bit of an infiltrator. And when she comes before Xerxes, he likes her, and the orphan becomes queen of the world's greatest empire. Just what Hollywood movies are made out of. But as with all Hollywood movies, there's a twist, and the twist in this movie is the villain Haman. Haman is a rising political force in the powers behind the throne, and he doesn't like Mordecai for various reasons. Mordecai basically not doing what Haman wants him to do. So Haman convinces King Xerxes that throughout his empire there are these Jewish people who are hiding in secret and who are secretly defying him and who follow their own rules and customs, which they did, and that therefore they're a danger to his rule. And so in that Bible reading where everyone was talking to each other, what happens is that Xerxes gives Haman permission to wipe out the Jews, and he gives him the money to do it. And as we heard in the Bible reading, Mordecai finds out about this and urges Esther to step in and speak to the king. But Esther's worried about that because to do that without being asked would be potential death. So the question becomes, will she remain silent and survive, or will she risk everything to confront the king and expose a conspiracy that could reshape history. Like any Hollywood movie, this story has its critics. So the early church fathers didn't like it because actually nowhere in the book of Esther does it mention God. It mentions the power of Xerxes, and we learn about the power of the Jewish people and their faith, but the word God is not mentioned. So the early church fathers couldn't see a lot of value in it. And Martin Luther in the 1500s, he didn't like it because he said it was filled with pagan naughtiness, which it pretty much is. It's a good book. So apart from being a really good story, what value is there in it for us? So what can we learn from Esther today? And the book of Esther is primarily about courage. It asks us to trust in God's providence even when we can't see it working. It requires us to take a posture of hope, to trust that God is committed to redeeming his good word and overcoming evil. And from our position, we can see that more clearly because we've had Jesus and we've had those events, but remember, these people had not. So Esther shows us that courage means speaking up when we need to bring God's message, even if we're feeling small when we do it. And our courage is fake. Martin Niemöller was a German pastor who was imprisoned by the Nazis for 8 years for defying Hitler. But he was also among a group of church leaders who, after the war, realised that they probably hadn't spoken up as much as they could have. And they acknowledged the failure of the church to speak out against the Nazis. And he wrote this famous poem. First they came for the communists, but I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the socialists, but I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, nasty bunch of people, obviously, but I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for me. Does anyone know the next line? No, but there was no one left to speak for me. Like Esther and Mordecai, we live in a world that doesn't always recognise the legitimacy of our beliefs, and we have a lot of challenges. We see laws being enacted, particularly more lately, where many of us would say that is not right, and we do not have the right to do that. People can do things now that we may think are more in the role and authority of God. The church has often been involved in movements and in social movements. So you think about William Wilberforce, who was a British pastor and who campaigned against the slave trade in the 18th and 19th century. You think about the US civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s and people like Martin Luther King Jr. And today there's loads of Christian NGOs that are actively working across the world to eliminate poverty, to eliminate childhood slavery and human trafficking. And I think it's really easy to think these are massive, big things. Esther had a massive, big thing that she was facing. If she didn't speak up, then her whole people were going to get wiped out. And that would be the end of the Jews in that part of the world. But I think it's very easy to look at what's going on in our world and think, how do we speak up in the big things, and how do I have any power? And I wanted to introduce this diagram to you because I find it really useful when I'm thinking about what I can influence and what I can impact and where I should be speaking up. So in this bigger circle of concern, we've got all of those big issues that we really care about. Climate change, war and conflict, poverty, human rights, global inequality, political instability, war, those things, all in that massive circle of concern. But we also have here a circle of influence, and these are the things that we can directly affect. So some of the areas that we can be making a change in is our conversations. How are we speaking to others? And when people talk about things that we don't agree with, are we just going along with it? We can use our votes, our donations, our advocacy. We can get involved in community actions. We can use our social media voice, and we do things as a church, and also some of us in workplaces. So this circle is smaller, but powerful. And when you act within your circle of influence, it actually grows. It goes up into your circle of concern. So instead of saying the world is broken, and I can't fix it, there is a disadvantage to this fan, you can say, what part of this issue can I influence today? So if you're concerned about a law that is passed, and this is just a personal example, and I don't expect anyone to have the same beliefs, but I have real problems with how easily abortion can be obtained. I have problems with abortion, but I actually have problems with how easily it can be obtained. So how can I speak up for that? So when I'm speaking with people about abortion, because I do work in the community sector, it does come up. I can be talking about, just honestly, bringing up my beliefs and not inflicting them on anyone, but if they're entitled to their opinion, then I'm entitled to also calmly say my opinion. And I think we all have something that is dear to us that, like Esther, we might want to speak up about. I think we also need to, what Esther teaches us is that courage is not the absence of fear. So when we think about courage, we often think about someone who's fearless. And if you're a Wizard of Oz fan, you'll know that the lion needed courage, and he discovered it was just going on and living your life anyway. But real courage normally shows up with quite a bit of fear attached. This young lady is Malala. You may remember her. She was shot in the face by the Taliban when she was about 14 or 15 for the crime of speaking up and saying that girls should be educated. That was all she said. And after surviving that, most people would think it would be reasonable if she just kind of stayed silent, because there were also death threats against her. She had real fear, she had real trauma. But she stood up anyway, and she spoke in the United Nations, and she's been advocating for girls' education around the world. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she figured that her cause mattered more than her fear. So when we come to Esther, Esther was afraid to go into the king, but she said, if I perish, I perish. For Esther, courage was not the absence of fear, but the deciding that the result was worth it. And also, courage requires us to be wise enough to think about how we speak out and to speak out in helpful ways. Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, "Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my attendants will fast as you do." Esther prepared for this conversation with her king by fasting and by taking the support of her community with her. She was a woman who followed her faith in an everyday way. But for this big act, she increased her prayer and focused her thoughts through fasting. She prepared spiritually before acting publicly, and this resulted in her taking a strategic approach to the king, which worked. Because what we find out at the end is she actually invites the king and Haman to a banquet, 2 banquets actually, and she puts her requests forward there so that she's not kind of challenging the king in public. She had wisdom, and she made sure that her voice was heard in a place where it was to be heard. Speaking up in a way that serves others strengthens the outcome. So what we learn from Esther is that there are times when we have to step out, there are times when we have to speak up, there are times when we have to do something that we are not comfortable with. And those things may be massive, big things like saving all of your people, or it might be little tiny things like being an impact in the life of your partner or your child or your friend or someone you know. Esther's narrative reminds us that the essence of living a life of purpose is found not in avoiding failure, but in responding to it with courage but courage that's rooted in God's word and in our preparations. We all will have our Esther moments, standing at the edge of a precipice, having to make a decision. I want to end today. I want you just to think for a minute about there might be a situation in which you need some courage. And then I just want to ask you to pray this prayer with me. That helps us to step out in faith. So let's pray. Spirit, use me today, not in some miracle that would make others marvel and would make me proud, not in the word of wisdom that would stay in the mind and make me always remembered, not in the heroic act that would change the world for the better and me for the worse, but in the mundane miracles of honesty and truth that keep the sky from falling, in the unremembered quiet words that keep a soul on the path, and in the unnoticed acts that keep the world moving slowly closer to the light. As Christians, we are called to do that, to keep our world moving closer and closer to the world that God would like us to be living in until that day when he comes again and his kingdom is fully established.